Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Addiction and the Three Principles with Harry Durbitsky and me, gregsuchy. Today, we're welcoming Damian to our conversation. Really kind of excited to talk about this topic today. What we're going to talk about is how we're not actually addicted to the substance so much as we're addicted to feeling normal, or the feelings associated with the substance or activity, whatever it is that we do to kind of escape. So I think this is a really good topic to cover. And Harry had asked Damian to join us. I'm going to let Harry do more of the intro for
him. Yeah, Damian wrote on Facebook what Greg said. I'll read it to you if I can. Not actually addicted to the substance, they rely upon it to feel normal. And when Damian wrote that, I have never met Damian, and we've never even talked except a little bit over text. This particular comment was a little deeper than I've seen, generally speaking, about addiction. It's in an area when I talk when I deal with people who are addicted, they complain about relapsing, not because they relapse, but they're so disappointed in themselves. All their money is gone. They're back on the street again, because I deal more with a poor crowd, and they're exasperated with giving up hope because it's a repeated cycle. And that, when Damian said what he said, I suddenly realized, no, that's the normal description of what human beings do when they have a problem or something. They describe the outside effects that it has upon them. But Damian actually hit a key point. They are actually uncomfortable with the feel. They miss the normal feeling. The word he used was normal. I might use a little bit different, but they miss that feeling. And I suddenly, yeah, that's what it is. It's always that. And so first I want to thank you, Damian, for the comment, because it really released something in me that took me a little bit deeper in my understanding of what the real situation is. And it's not the outside. It's always not the outside. It's always an inside job. So this is a group discussion session we have, and Damian's going to sort of lead it and so on. But so can you introduce yourself, Damian, and then maybe get into the topic a little, and hopefully we'll have a nice group discussion out of it as well.
Sure. Hi, guys. Thank you very much for having me on your wonderful show. Just for anyone who's actually on the call right now, you'll be able to see that I'm just driving at the moment, but that doesn't stop me from multitasking. For anyone who doesn't know, I came across the principles in 2011, and it helped me with my own mental health issues at the time. I was suffering from OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, stress, anxiety, overindulgence in alcohol and all sorts of narcotics to change my state. And the principles pointed me towards my own health, and they pointed me back towards my own health. As a result of coming across them, I then wrote a book, which some of you may have read, called Do Nothing, which again kind of deepened my understanding in the principles by interviewing and speaking with people about the principles who are out there sharing the principles. And then it became my work. I started to share it. I started to deliver it in business, actually, more than anything, working with entrepreneurs. And then I wrote another book called The Entrepreneur Success Formula, and the principles were kind of like the underlying theme in there. It's how you think about situations. Problems are always opportunities if you look at them in a certain way. And as a result, I've done now my second TED Talk, which was this week. The one I did on Wednesday was called How Understanding the Mind Can Help Overcome Depression and Help Us Be More Entrepreneurial, and talks a little bit about addiction in that. And the three principles has really been the cornerstone of my work, I guess, for the last well, certainly for the last 8 or 9 years. And I see it as, I mean, I always start my whatever training I do by saying that it's a description. It's a description of how something works. It isn't prescriptive in any way. And I've found, especially over the last couple of years, by kind of taking my understanding of the principles and adding it to the really good work that's being done out there in mental health and in addiction by really interesting people like Dr. Gabor Maté. I think he's superb, and the work he does with addicts in Vancouver. And just learning a little bit more about what's actually going on so that we can help point people back towards their own health. And sometimes that happens with a thought. Sometimes that happens by pointing people towards the principles, indeed. You know, some people don't understand that they've got this conversation going on in their head that they don't have to pay attention to it if they don't want to. And for other people who have, you know, deeply entrenched habits and behaviors, which is all really addiction is. It's not, you can't actually be addicted to a substance as such. Your body will depend on it after a while, but that's not what we're addicted to. We are actually addicted to the change in feeling state. And so kind of looking at that and where that starts to go wrong. Dr. Marte talks about emotional loss. And when I started to work with my clients and point out, you know, that there was a reason for whatever strategy they'd come up with, whatever behavior, whatever habit it was, there was a reason for it. You know, we've been designed over billions of years of evolution to be a perfectly working system. And when we look at that, when we look at it as it being, and this is kind of like comes back to the entrepreneurial thing, it's like rather than look at it as a problem, you look at it as an opportunity to learn. So we would kind of look at the habit and the behavior and say, well, you know, where's the benefit of this? Where's it come from? What is beneficial about it? Because we've done it as a benefit. And we change our thinking about it. And then it's much easier to then to have an insight, to have a thought which goes, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, that came from when I was a 3-year-old child and I was in hospital and I reached out to touch my mother's hand and there was a pane of glass. And I realized in that moment, not knowing it in that moment because she was a 3-year-old, but you know, I had to put some strategies into place which would protect me, because that's really all we're doing with our thinking, is we're coming up with a strategy that protects us. So you know, people that are addicted to a change in feeling state, it's because they don't like the situation they're in, so they want to change it. It's just natural human behavior. However, ultimately all we're doing is we're trying to make ourselves feel better. But of course, by understanding the principles, what we know is that you are already better. You know, there's nothing to get to. It's a state that you're already in, but for your thinking taking you away from that situation. So, you know, oftentimes it's about pointing people back towards their own innate health through understanding the principles. And sometimes I call it consciousness engineering. Sometimes it's about taking our understanding of how the mind works and applying strategies to it. So, before, when I first came across the principles, I would talk about meditation and say, oh yeah, you don't want to meditate. No, you know, you don't need that. You've got the principles. And now what I realize is that, meditation is just a way of quietening the mind. And it's a very useful technique. I used to point people away from hypnotherapy and NLP, but again, they're just techniques which change the state. That's all they're doing. The principles explain how they work. The principles explain why meditation works for some people. The principles explain why hypnotherapy would work for some people, and it worked for me. Now, I've had hypnotherapy, and it's been really effective. So the principles are kind of like the cornerstone of this jigsaw puzzle, and without them, you could look at all the other pieces of the puzzle and not be able to really kind of make out what it all means. But as soon as you take the principles, it's like, oh, that explains why all these things happen. This explains why we get our best ideas when we're not looking at the problem. This explains why people are addicted to habits and behaviors. This explains why people seemingly they're doing it because it's a strategy to survive. And it's really then helpful working with people to then just be able to unpick that. It just makes sense of it all. And it helped me in my own life as well, kind of see. So, for instance, when I went through those first like 2 or 3 years of understanding the principles, I looked at my own behaviors and I looked at some of them and I just thought, oh, I've got to do something about that. So I would then go through sort of months and years of kind of tackling the problem, only to realize sort of further down the line that I didn't actually have to do any of that. I didn't have to worry about any of it. I just had to listen. I just had to listen to myself. And so that's why meditation is actually quite good, because when you meditate, you're at peace with your own mind, you're at peace with yourself, and you just go into a state of deep listening, which is all we really got anyway, whether it's listening to clients or listening to ourselves, listening to loved ones, listening to our kids. And if we go into that state of deep listening to ourselves, we know what the answers are. We know what is best for us. And yeah.
Mark, how do we know? Like, I agree with you, but how do we know that it's the right answer?
For me, it's always a simple one. It comes from beyond the intellect.
Which means, can you explain that a little deeper?
Yeah, I kind of know when I'm talking to myself, and I know when I get something. I mean, I said in my TED talk the other day, it's like Einstein was just as likely to think of a cheese sandwich as he was E equals MC squared. I don't know. It's just it's. I think Elsie described it as a whisper from God. And again, this is where I guess I kind of disagree with some other people around this, because I think we're co-creators. I think we are God. I mean, we can't not be. We must be part of that which created us. It's logic. It's common sense. So if we're
Sid always said that.
Yeah. Oh, great. I didn't realize Sid always said that. Yeah, well, we might, if we're going to co-create, why not have some fun with it? As I always say with the entrepreneurial thinking, it's like we didn't have to invent Maseratis. We could have just walked. but, getting in a Maserati is more fun.
So when we have this answer, like which is what you seem to be like what we talk about in the three principles, the difference between knowing what our ego is versus knowing what the truth is or the fact is, rather than the belief. How does that help someone who's addicted?
Well, it may not. I mean, this is what's so great about this. We don't have to fix people, and they're not broken. What I've seen with myself and my own clients is that when people get more at peace with who they are, it bothers them less. The worst way to get someone to diet is to get them to stop eating, because they're just going to be thinking about food all the time. I know people close to me who are in AA, and every single day they're thinking about drinking. Every single day they just think about drinking constantly. I mean, that's horrendous. And it would be so much easier if they could just not have to think about it, or just not even bother them. And so the more we kind of can get in tune with that, with the fact there's nothing wrong with us, because this is the point I keep coming back to. It's like we've been created by billions of years of evolution, billions of years of evolution, and probably infinity before that. Infinity is a very long time, especially towards the end. I think that was a Woody Allen gag. We've been designed, and there's nothing wrong with us. We don't come out as a broken system. So when people hear that, when you kind of get them to reset to that, it's like, okay, well, now what? Now what are you hearing? Now what's that telling you? And so sometimes it may help them. When Dr. Marto was working with these addicts, he said for some of them, they needed the heroin. They needed that feeling state. They needed that change because he obviously doesn't know about the principles. until something comes along that, you know, allows them that freedom from their own thinking, which the principles does, or it did for me, and it does for my clients when I point them towards the principles. It's kind of understandable. You would say, well, it's understandable why they would want it, but because for them, they're just doing it to feel normal. So again, it fits in with what I said. It's you know, they're just, for them, the heroin is, or the methadone or whatever it is just is resetting them back to normality. But understanding the principles is kind of like it's kind of like the Joker in the pack, because I don't know how many times I've pointed people towards the principles, and something has happened in that moment, or in those days, or in those hours that I've spent with them. And, you know, months or years later, they just say, I don't know what it is, but I'm okay. And I didn't need to do anything. I didn't even need to see anything. I don't even understand it. I mean, there's people that I speak to that still don't know what they are. and yet there they are, you know, having a great life and just going, I don't need to do all the stuff that I needed to do before. And I don't even know why. I said, well, you don't need to know why. You know, as Sid said, it's like, you know, when you get that feeling, just throw the tape out the window. That's exactly what he meant. So it's we don't need to do any more than that. So to me, the principles is kind of like, it's the explanation which shows why all these other approaches either work or don't work, but it points us back to, and I love what you say, Harry, about, you know, the spiritual nature of it. It points us back to our perfection. It points us back to, you know, the system within, which is already operating. And we don't need all the bells and whistles on the top.
I think, like, for me, the spiritual side of the principles are the loft the unending infinity of experience that we have, and the psychological side point us towards the, you know, our human experience and how to live in a simple, happy way. But just because of who I am, I was never that interested in being happy. I was more interested in the loft of my connection to God, my connection to feelings. And one of the things I'm starting to notice, and one of the reasons why I think Greg and I are very good together, is we both come at it from a slightly different perspective. And his mind is interested in the spiritual nature of the human experience, and I'm interested in the spiritual nature of the human experience in a different way. I'm really, and I that's what I think the principles provide is unlimited exposure and angles to the same truth, and I feel the evolution of the three principles in the next generation will be more in the spiritual side of it. We've really delved into the psychological side of the principles, and it's been very helpful, but it's limiting. And the spiritual nature is unlimiting because, of course, if I'm spiritual, I'm just flowing with the water and accepting what life is bringing to me without thinking too much. So I like the way you're pointing people not only to nothing, but what is nothing, you know, is an interesting question. For Sid, it was, what is mind? But I like the way you say what is nothing, because it is opening us up. I wonder if anyone else has any question for Damian. Deanna, how are you feeling about sort of what he's talking about? Which by the way, I kind of like. So
I do too. I wrote down, I had to go get my pencil a while ago because I wrote down something that Damian just said about, I don't think you called it a good place. I had to figure out something to call it, but a healthy, happy spot. It's something that we're already in. It's just our thoughts are taking us away from it. and to me that sort of is it in a nutshell. When I'm in recovery, and so my addiction was that it was to take me away from whatever I was feeling or thinking about at the time. And it was an insight for me to actually realize that. And it made it a lot easier to say, hey, I don't need that. I don't need that artificial takeaway. I'm able to let that thing go, the thoughts go now, knowing what the principles are. So yeah, I agree. It's a nice, it's always interesting to hear other people's points of view on it, because they bring you right back around to your own, but they say it in a different way.
If you've ever, I don't know if any of you have ever read I don't know if you call it a poem or short essay by Derek Neville called Paths. And he's talking about all the different paths up the mountain, and how as you're ascending the mountain, you get a broader view because less of the mountain is in the way. So it's like the techniques, the mountain kind of represents techniques or religions or belief systems or whatever. So the farther you get along a spiritual path, the less those things kind of get in the way, and you get a broader view. But you're still limited until you reach that ultimate peak. And then what you see when you get to the top is that everybody's on the same path. We just have different views of the same journey. Some people, it might be a steep cliff that they have to climb, and others it's a grassy field. But it's still the same mountain, and it's still ultimately the same destination. And I think it's really important what you pointed out earlier, Damian, that we are this thing we call God. We are that energy, that creative energy, and as such, as being a part of it, we do have creative abilities. And that's where our, look at modern society, look at everything around us. I mean, you're riding in a vehicle right now, like you were talking about earlier. We could have just walked. But yet we have these vehicles that we can cram a bunch of people and stuff in and go long distances in fairly short periods of time. It's like, where does that come from? Where did that idea even originate from? And we're all kind of in that collective consciousness and that wisdom that's available to everybody. And that there's been so many times when there's a big breakthrough in technology or medicine or something, where it happens simultaneously at different places around the world with different people, where they all have the same idea at the same time. So, the evidence is there that we're all connected, and that, there's a oneness to life and to our experience here. And it's only our stories that we create that cause that illusion of separation. And the more separate we feel from each other, the more sick we feel. We don't have that true spiritual connection, and we get that kind of that aching, that desire for something deeper. And unfortunately, in most societies, especially Western society, we don't talk about spiritual stuff really. It's like a big no-no. We don't talk about it because we might disagree, and if we disagree, then we have to argue and we have to fight, and then we have to be enemies. There's like this childish mentality behind any kind of spiritual just conversation, even just trying to talk to somebody, not to change their view, but just to find out what they believe. I find that unfortunately a lot of people are even afraid to sit down and do that. Let's just have a cup of coffee and talk. I'm not trying to change your view, and I don't want you to try to change mine. Let's just talk. And we'll see if we can figure out, not figure out, but let's just see if we can notice that we're on the same mountain. We're taking the same journey. We have a different view of it because we're on different sides of the mountain. We're in different places at this point in time. But that doesn't mean either of us is wrong. Let's just enjoy the journey.
I'll go one stage further. When you said about the feeling of separation, I'd say the separation from ourselves.
That's
So
what it is. Yeah.
yeah, because we're all on a spiritual journey, whether we call it that or not, whether we know it or not, we're all on it. And the fact that we call it spiritual is almost, it's almost crazy in a way, because what does that mean? Well, it from a logical perspective, we are this matter that's slowed down to a vibration where we can actually see it and feel it. And when it speeds up, it goes back into the nothing, it goes back into the infinite. We're starting to understand more about what that actually means, and to be able to comprehend it. But of course, the problem that we have is that consciousness, we can't comprehend consciousness because we're using consciousness to try and comprehend the thing we're trying to comprehend, or try and make sense of it. But ultimately, we are all on this spiritual journey. We are all on this spiritual path. But there is no journey. There is no path. This is the point. We are already here. We're already home. We already have everything we need. We are God. And as soon as we start to use language, it starts to take us away from what's already there. And so, yeah, from a practical point of view, I think the best thing we can all do is just sit and listen.
And share. If you want to grow, you have to share the feeling. And what both you guys are talking about was really the essence of the LA conference just recently. There was a shift away from you should listen to all the top people, and that we're all in this together. And when somebody shares, it's all part of the experience in the moment, not listening to top people and then following what they have to say or give them all the credit. They've already made their money. They've already led the show, but there's a new stage happening in the three principles now, theoretically anyway. And in LA, Damian, it was noticeable. We were together as one, rather than we were listening to people on stage. And they were different. They were sharing a feeling rather than I know the answer. And that's the message Sid would want, that everybody here in this thing, we are all a collective. And when Deanna shares, it's just as valuable as when Greg shares, or anybody. And we are all in this collective feeling of oneness that Sid described. And that's all he talked about. He didn't talk about the psychological world and you have problems. He talked more about you're already okay. You're already perfect. You're already spiritual. And that feeling is what carried the initial thrust. And the only words he used was in Linda Quiring's book, her second book, Beyond Beliefs. That's all he ever talked about in the psychological world. He didn't talk about what all the psychologists have taken it into. And although it's very, very powerful and beautiful, and the world wants to fix their problems, the answer, that's not what Sid was talking about at all. He was simply talking, it's what you alluded to, Damian, it's a spiritual reality. And that's where all the goodies are, all the answers are. And in that feeling is the only place you're going to see. And none of us here know how we changed. I don't know how I changed. We just know we were lucky enough to catch a little glimpse of the truth. And even Sid's, kept growing and growing and growing immensely. And he had to adjust when the psychologist came, but he knew it was the right way. And then they took it out to a message, and there are layers of that message going out. But it's not there yet, guys. It's still in the expanse of where we're going. And Greg brought up something with what they're not only want to feel normal, we all want to feel that we're growing. Like the trouble with addiction is you feel the opposite. You're going in the wrong direction. But to have that feeling of growing, gratitude and growing are two things that fit together very beautifully. And
perhaps part of the reason why the Three Principles community has kind of struggled a little bit with the spiritual side is because the 3 Ps are the spiritual side. We're trying to create something that's already there. We're reinventing the wheel. Because I truly believe that these principles are what William James was looking for when he started the field of psychology. When he said that someday we will discover the fundamental principles behind human psychology. And I believe that that's what Sid discovered. And human psychology at its core basis, not at what the field of psychology is, but human psychology itself is our spiritual nature. It's completely ineffable. You can't really put words to it. You know, they've done their best, but all that they've managed to do is come up with groupings of symptoms that they call diseases. And then they're just poking at the symptoms and hoping that eventually the cause will go away. And every once in a while, it just happens on its own. So they're like, oh, see, it worked. And that's the I don't know if you want to say problem, but that's the kind of double-edged sword with techniques, is that they don't always work, which means they don't work. But yet we convince ourselves that they work sometimes because sometimes we get the relief that way. Well, I tried positive thinking yesterday and it worked. Suddenly I was in a better mood. Now, it wasn't the positive thinking that worked. It was that you distracted yourself long enough for a new thought to come in. Mm-hmm. That's why it works when it works. So it's like these principles really get to that core matter, the cause of the issues. You know, like we were talking about earlier with the true addiction really isn't to the chemicals, it's to the feeling. And that's absolutely evident in the fact that you can have people who go in for, let's say, a 90-day treatment program, and they come out of that 90 days later and go right back to where they were before. After 90 days, you don't have the physical addiction anymore. The chemicals are out of your system. It is completely 100% psychological. It's because the core problem was never handled. And the core problem is simply that we've lost sight of how we experience life. We believe our thinking so much more than we really need to. Then I don't want to say than we should, because I don't believe in shoulds. I think that each of us has our own path to take. And none of us is exempt from getting caught up in our thinking. I don't care how many years people have in, understanding the 3 principles and how well accomplished they are within the community. Everybody gets caught up in thought from time to time. It's going to happen. All this is just describing how that works. Understanding the 3 principles doesn't make us exempt from getting mad at somebody that cut us off on the freeway. It doesn't stop that from happening. But in my experience, what it's done for me is it doesn't happen as often anymore. And when it does, I don't take it so seriously, so it doesn't last as long. It's just a quick fleeting thing, kind of laugh at it. Like, oh, there it is. There it is again, that thought thing, and just kind of laugh at it and move on with the day. That's kind of the beauty of this, though, is that simplicity, that whether you understand how it works or not, it's still all through our thinking, every single thing that we experience.
One of the surprises, I think, of when you teach the 3 principles, Damian, is you talk from a from a feeling of being part of mind. And you didn't say what the person experienced as an insight. I gave a recent talk on a show, and then there happened to be a guy sitting there, just it was a one-to-one thing. And his insight had nothing to do with what I had talked about. And I thought, how fantastic. He caught the feeling of what I was talking about. And then he shared it with himself. And then it had, like, I think he thought it came something from out of this, when it actually came from inside him, and it was totally fresh and new, and as Greg was mentioning, totally relevant to his world of what he needed to hear and see at the time. And it was very simple and profound and deep at the same time. And I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, it's nice to know we don't have to do people's thinking for them. That's a relief, isn't it? Something you said earlier, Greg, was it reminded me of children. So on the basis that most children are in a loving environment. Okay, so their needs are met. Not all, obviously, but let's say that if you're a child who is in a loving environment and you've had your basic needs met, in the early years, your brain frequency is at a different frequency to how we are as adults. It's in a much lower frequency range, and it's one of the reasons why, and it's done for a reason. So for an evolutionary reason, they are in learning mode, and they learn a hell of a lot from a very young age, very, very quickly. We are able to go into or to change our own brain frequencies, so we're able to do that. We're able to actually practice dropping into a lower frequency, and we do it anyway. So whenever we're in a flow state, whenever we're not thinking, we are dropping into that lower frequency. We do it as we go to sleep and as we wake up. And so that was one of the examples I mean about, hacking the system. Is like we're just I wouldn't say even improving the odds, because we are literally one thought away from a new experience. And that's what Sid said, and that's what I've seen time and time again. Doesn't matter what it is. You don't need to be meditating to do this. And it's about showing people that it's not the meditation that's doing it. It's the system that's doing it. And you are just as likely to have a thought of a cheese sandwich as E equals MC squared. The next thought, you don't choose the next thought that comes into your head. And again, this is where I kind of help people to say, you don't choose the next thought that comes into your head, but when it's there, it's your responsibility of what you do with it. And you can have a thought which says, I don't like this feeling state, I need to change it. Or you can have a thought which says, this too shall pass. Now, neither's right. There's no right or wrong about it. That's how the system works. The principles just show us that this constant stream of thought and consciousness, which is brought to us through the energy of mind, is the process that's happening from the day we're born until the day we die, and probably afterwards as well, in some way, shape, or form. And that when we tap into, it's like anything, when we understand how something works, we can utilize it better. In the same way that we're learning more about consciousness, we're learning more about how our brains operate. In my talk on Wednesday, I showed an example of someone who had 90% of their brain wasn't there. They lived a perfectly normal life. That's a really good example of brain plasticity and how it adapts, and the incredible things that we can do with medicine now. The baby that was recently born at sort of 9 ounces at 24 weeks, we can keep that baby alive now, whereas sort of 15, 20 years ago that wouldn't happen. And what we're understanding about the human mind and about how the brain operates, it just points us back to what happened to Sid and what he saw. And it gives us hope. and this was my talk. It's hope for the future. It was actually a TEDx on optimism for the future. And so it's interesting when you said about sharing it. It's like, well, the more people that know that there is this really simple thing that's going on, which at first might even seem a bit of a so what. It's like, well, you're alive, you thinking, and that those thoughts are brought to life by this thing called consciousness. We don't know what that is. We don't even know what the energy behind life is, but it seems to have some sort of intelligence built in, a standard. But we do know we have thoughts, because that thing that's happening in your head right now, that's what we're talking about. And so people can relate to it, and they can go, oh, okay, well, that's an interesting way of describing it. And of course, what we're pointing to from the spiritual side of it, which again, I don't really like to use the word spiritual, because it kind of segregates when it's all the same thing, is to point people back to, well, if that system is working perfectly, which it is, but the results that you're getting are not helping you, in the same way that, by understanding how anything works, we can utilize it better. What happens when, for instance, you realize that there's nothing wrong with you? What happens when you have that insight, that you realize that, oh, wait a minute, I don't have to pay attention to a thought. For me, it was that OCD thought, and I didn't pay attention to it. It's like, oh, I don't have to pay attention to that thought. Or, the thought saying that I want to change my state. What if you didn't have to pay attention to it? Or what if you had another thought which said, well, this too shall pass? Whatever it is, it's pointing to hope. That's what it is. It's pointing to hope.
Hope is spiritual.
It's all spiritual. All of it.
Yeah, I understand that, but hope is the opening up to the spiritual essence of who we are. Without hope, we have nothing except disappointment, sadness.
Yeah, the opening up part is the important part. I mean, that's the whole key to getting the principles, if you want to call it getting the principles, whatever term you want to use. Your experience of this understanding will deepen greatly the more you're open to having a new experience, rather than stuck on what your previous experiences have been. Dropping that comparison, well, this can't be right because it doesn't agree with the last 20 years of the BS that I've been fed. It doesn't agree with what my family believes. It doesn't agree with what my coworkers believe. It doesn't agree with what society in general believes. But look at how society is operating. It's pretty poor. I mean, pretty much hands down around the world at this point, most societies, or most governments and most countries are just really in a pretty crappy place. There's a lot more separation now than there ever has been. And there's a lot more people fighting each other and getting offended at every little thing, and trying to create all these arguments over it. And it's just, the more we dive into that, and the more we create that illusion of separation and reinforce it, the less we're feeling the spirit of the whole thing. And the less we're in touch with that creativity. All these problems could go away pretty quickly if people would just stop focusing on the problems and start focusing on what the real solution is. And the solution is to quit arguing over who's right and who's wrong, and just do what's best for the majority of people. And we look at like addiction issues, being addicted to the feeling rather than the substance, so to speak. And that's not to say that there isn't some physical aspect to a lot of substances, that there is. You know, for anybody watching this who's, on heroin, let's say, yeah, you're going to need to medically detox. There's no way around that. What we're talking about is, what about after you've detoxed? What about after all the chemicals are out of your system and you still want to put that needle in your arm? That's what we're talking about here. That addiction to the feeling, to feeling better. And I saw it myself when I went into AA in 2012. And personally, I went from smoking about half a pack of cigarettes a day up to about 2 packs a day. And I went from almost never drinking coffee to drinking extreme amounts of coffee on a regular daily basis, to the point where it was impacting my sleep. And then I ended up getting onto energy drinks. And I had some real bad health issues from that. Just because I put down the drugs and the alcohol doesn't mean my addictive habits had gone away. I just traded them for something else because I didn't realize that the problem wasn't the drugs and alcohol. The problem was that I believed that I needed to feel differently than how I felt. And as long as I believe that how I'm feeling is wrong, then I'm going to feel like I need to escape. But the fact of the matter is, nothing we're ever feeling is wrong. There's no such thing as a bad feeling. There's some that are less comfortable than others, but they're all good. They're all part of this experience of life. When we experience the death of someone that we love, guess what? It's going to hurt. There's no way around that.
But the learning is just as profound from either side of the fence.
Yeah.
That's one of the things. Initially, Damian, when we were at Salt Spring, we were all about good feelings. And as such, I had the opinion that was the only way to experience hope and learning. As the years went along, I was addicted to that thought.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a little bit of a surprise when I relaxed and, to use your word, did nothing. And I found I was actually learning as much from both sides of the fence, from the uncomfortable feeling or the comfortable feeling. And they were both very, very rewarding. But in the end, until I realized I was learning from the uncomfortable feelings, I was stuck. I was stuck in a belief, and that belief held me back for years and years and years. And all it required was for me to sit comfortably in the uncomfortable feeling, and the rest of it just took care of itself. And can you imagine what a lousy counselor I was? Because it's ironic, but it's actually the truth, because I was uncomfortable if the client took us into an uncomfortable feeling. Mm-hmm. So I was hopeless.
I have a question for Damian.
Hey, what's going on, Martin?
Yeah, hi, Damian. I'm Martin.
Hiya. Hi, Martin. You all right?
I know it says owner on there, but I don't know how to get it off.
You are the owner of Martin.
Anyway, yeah. That I am. Yeah, I have a question. Like you said about 2011 that you had came across the 3 principles, and I'm just wondering, like, when you were in the beginning of it, there must have been a time in your life when you started to notice that you had to really quiet your mind, and really notice some of the thoughts that really stood in the way, so to speak. And I guess, maybe I was wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit, that in the beginning stages of learning of the 3 principles, not so much other what were the struggles, but what were the things that really helped you to move along, to really notice the thoughts that were getting in the way, and and how you could get past that a little bit.
It's a good question. It's a really good question. I mean, the biggest issue for me at the beginning was I had such a profound physical change as well as mental that it really was a case of the hold still while I fix you. It's like I just wanted to kind of spread it and tell everyone, and when you're not really very good at describing something that you know that you know is useful, it becomes a bit of a dog's dinner, to be honest. I mean, you know, I remember the first training I ever did, and it was just an absolute disaster. It couldn't have gone any worse. I mean, it really was terrible. So I guess that took precedence, really, because for me it was, you know, it had helped me with my OCD, and you know, I say this now, I have OCD thoughts now. It doesn't stop the thinking going away. I gave up alcohol for 18 months, and then I had a real kind of like insight into that, which was like, oh, I've now got all this thinking about the fact that I haven't drunk for 18 months, and now I can just take it or leave it whenever I want to, and I just don't think about it. And so when I have the OCD thoughts now, I don't put any energy into it. So it was about where my energy was going more than anything, and my energy, certainly in the early stages, was pointing towards trying to understand it better myself, but probably so I could share it. So it was probably a little bit loaded in that respect, but I just knew it was helping me. So it was like, oh well, I can't describe this thing, but I can do a really bad job of it. But I know that it works, and this again comes back to the talk I did on Wednesday, where I talked about beliefs. You know, a belief is just a thought that we just know is true for us, and it has a lot of power in it, because we and I even talked about where we form beliefs. But a really simple way of, and this is a really practical thing, a really simple way of getting a belief is just to see another human being and see that they do something, and then go, well, I'm a human, you're a human, you can do it, well, maybe I could do it. You know, it must be possible because someone's done it. Roger Bannister breaking the 4-minute mile, and then loads of people did it in the weeks afterwards, even though it hadn't been done ever before. So for me, it was, even though I was doing a really lousy job of explaining it, I was actually doing quite a good job of living it. And I think that's probably what people saw. It's like Harry said about, you know, the feeling. They probably saw that even though I couldn't describe it, whatever this thing I was trying to describe, it was obviously doing something. So it must be useful. So I was overanalyzing. You know, I was trying to work it out. And again, what's happened, I guess, certainly in the last couple of years, which is why I actually like looking at like the brain stuff, because it's a lovely distraction. You know, it really is. Because at the end of the day, you know, it comes back to the fact that we can't not be part of that which created us. Therefore, we must, what we call it, God, whatever it is. We are that energy. We are that infinite intelligence, and whatever happens in our life is actually irrelevant. We just make it relevant, and so we get to make it all up. And sometimes we see the fallacy of that, and sometimes we see the hilarity of that, but it's all made up, all of it. So to kind of come around to your question, I mean, I hope that was useful in terms of where you were sort of pointing to. But what I see now is that there really is nothing to do. There really is nowhere to get to. We really are just making it all up. And it's beautiful. You know, it's great. And why not have some fun with it? I mean, you know, the stuff that I'm doing with some clients at the moment it's fun. It's great fun. We're playing with stuff. I'm putting like subliminal messages into things, and it's fun. Why not? You know, let's go and create Maseratis. Why not? Let's go and build things. Let's go and play with things, because none of it matters and all of it matters. I don't know if that was any use at all, but
No, that was right on. That's exactly. You explained a lot of things right there. I appreciate it very much. Yeah.
thank you. Oh, I've got a little message from someone here. Let's have a. Oh, there's a message in the chat. Did you guys see that? Because I'm on the phone. I don't usually do this on the phone, you see. So, oh, hold on a minute. Where have I gone? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good. Owner, one of the things you brought up, which is really relevant, is what's on the mind of the person at a certain point in time. And just to next month we're going to have Christine Heath on, and I asked different people like Damian. I didn't ask him, but different people. What's on the minds of people who are addicted, or minds of people in low moods and so on? And she came up with 4 or 5 questions. And we're going to actually ask those questions to her and see what we have for a group discussion. And so we're going to do that for next month with both shows, is to try and, one of the things that is on my mind is what's on the mind of the people that we're working with, or just on the minds of people. And Damian's much more aware of certain things than I am, and so is Greg, by the way. I don't really look at that stuff. So that particular question you asked is of direct interest to me right now. What's on the mind of people, and how can we answer it in a simple and beautiful way? And so we're going to actually have a show specific to your question next week, and then 2 weeks later, another one, a little bit different type of show. And I think it is relevant of where are we missing the boat? Where are we not answering the question of the people? That's just as relevant as we have the answer. And it's a question that every time I go into teaching, it's always the question on my mind. What is it that I'm not hearing? What is their real question? How can I connect with that person to share what's on their mind? Because it's very easy to get a good feeling when you're talking about the principles. And I'm with you, Damian. Fun is where it's at. If it's not fun, F it. Type of thing. I totally 100% agree with that. And if you're having fun while you're teaching or working or sharing, I think you get 5 stars. 5 stars. Yeah.
And just on that one, because this will be actually quite useful if there's anyone who shares the principles with others in a therapeutic way, or in any way actually. This is where we get to have fun with the creation side, because when we drop into that space of connection, when we drop into that space of listening, it's so easy to then get together with someone else and start to co-create stuff. So I do that, from a business coaching perspective. It's great fun to do that. And it really does make a difference when you have 2 minds connecting with each other in that co-creation space. So for instance, as a coach, it's really easy to get someone to feel excited. It's really easy, because all you need to do is you need to ask what excites them. And then you need to use the power of the principles by just getting them to go there. I mean, it's just such a simple thing to do, and we can all do it. We could do it now, to say, well, think of a thing that excites you. Right, now go there. And just go there and just imagine it. And you can get people to really get excited, because all you need to do then is you need to, again, by kind of touching, by connecting with them, finding out then what drives them, and then take this thing that excites them and the thing that drives them and really kind of 10x it, sort of like put them together and get them to get really excited about something. And then, of course, you can just use that as a teaching point and just say, well, what did we do there? What have we just done there? We've just gone to a place of, I mean, let's say, for instance, you're working with someone who's depressed, and we've just got them to go somewhere. And just said, okay, well, I've just taken you into a different feeling state. Have you taken anything? Did you go anywhere? Did you do anything? No, we just sat in this space of connection, and we just used our imagination, and we used the power of thought and the power of consciousness. Well, let me tell you about that, because guess what? That's what we're all doing. But we can tap into its potential. And it just makes coaching really fun, because all you're doing is just getting people to get excited and enjoy life in that moment. You say, well, wouldn't you like to do that more often? Yeah. Well, that would be good, wouldn't it? It's like, well, come and join our gang, because we're doing that all the time. And when we're not, we know it's temporary.
Right. It's funny because what you're talking about, that change of mental state, is exactly the same whether we're using drugs or not. But the difference is, with using chemicals, drugs and alcohol, and even sex and gambling, making those natural chemicals, we end up with side effects. So yeah, we get that change of mental state, but it's very temporary with the chemicals, and it like I said, you end up with side effects afterward. You end up feeling all groggy and out of it, and you end up in a lower state than where you were in the first place. And then at some point your tolerance goes up, so then you need even more to find that escape. Whereas, just having this really simple understanding of how we experience life can provide that relief on a regular basis without the side effects and without the need for finding the chemical that we want to put in us, Like, you can have that relief any place, anywhere, just simply by being with what is.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe
What a relief.
Carmel had a thing. Maybe he could read that that statement that he had. I thought it was actually kind of cool.
Which one? Sorry.
Carmel, he just put something out. It's gone now, but he had something. I can't see who you are, Carmel, but I'm sure
you're unmuted, Carmel.
No, I said it's. The way I see it, it's basically it's game of illusions, and which ones we give relevance or importance to.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Yeah.
And the ones which depends on the ones we give importance to. Then there's the behavior, and we pay sort of in the illusory worldwide play, whatever theater, whatever. We pay the price or whatever it is. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, definitely. Because there's plenty of evidence of that. If you just look at all the people that and how they react differently to different situations.
The separate realities, yes.
There's some people who a long line at the grocery store is the end of their world. I can't possibly wait 20 minutes to get my groceries. That's just, what am I going to do? And then there's other people that 20 minutes in the line at the grocery store is a great opportunity to make a new friend with the person in line in front of them. Everybody handles that situation differently, but the situation isn't changing for each person.
I see that every day. I always have the confirmation of separate realities. I see it every day, the same thing.
Yeah, so what kind of relevance do you give to that situation is really the question. That's a great point.
It depends on what the experience you want in your in your mind, I guess, in your brain. Depends on the thought circuit or whatever, I guess. But yes, I agree. It's fun. It can be fun or tragic, depending on the reality you're in. Sort of.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to support what Greg said, Sid Banks, after he lost his wife, and he was just as ordinary as every other human being when they lost their wife. It was the most devastating experience he had ever had. It was unbelievable to watch him go through that. And then he was lonely. And so he's sitting at the grocery store in line. He happened to bump into this lady, and that became his second wife. So one person is complaining about how long the line is, and there's Sid met his second wife, which turned out to be another gem. So every moment is a gem, of course, according to our perspective to it.
Every moment is like a tiny big bang. Every moment is a big bang, full of possibilities. So, thanks.
Maybe, Damian, you could wrap it up, and with just some final words. Did you enjoy the show?
Something epic and profound. No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. Just
well, just really kind of where we started, which was, we have it all inside of us. Even you were talking about the pharmacy that we have, that we create inside of us. The oxytocin and the serotonin and all the good feelings that we are able to create. It's all within. We're not born with any deficiencies, and that's nice to know. That's really hopeful to know. And the more we look for the answers outside of us, Sid said, a step to the outside is a step in the wrong direction. It just makes so much sense when you just know that it's all within. And so, and that's the hopeful bit, to know that whoever you meet and whatever situation they're in and whatever habits and behaviors that they have which are hurting them, just knowing that there is this perfection that is waiting to be rediscovered, and the starting point is just to tell, to show them how they're making it all up. That's and then have fun with it, because that's what we've got. But it's pretty good. It's a pretty good approach. And it works. It's what's so great about it, and it's so simple.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Damian. It's been a great conversation. Thanks for everybody that participated. Please join us again next week. We'll continue the conversation, and love you all. I'm going to unmute everybody so you can say thanks and goodbye and everything. And everybody enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Really, really enjoyed it. It was brilliant.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
There's